warm welcome to the last edition of In Conversation in this year. We are very happy for the ongoing support of Deutsche Bank, and I'm also very happy to let you know that the series will be extended by another 2 years. But we're very excited. It's been a really great format, I think, to actually have a conversation with wonderful artists like you, Monica, and to engage with the audience. And I know there are, again, many artists here today to also have a conversation and facilitate it among artists. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much, dear Monica, for being with us. And really, it's a true pleasure. And as many of you know, and you had a long history with Berlin, you have a long history with the National Gallery in particular, and we will touch upon many of those different points here in this conversation. But perhaps to start off with, I would like to ask you a bit of a personal question when you look back in your childhood, or perhaps a young adult. Was there a moment or an encounter where you felt, I am an artist and I don't have a choice? I just am an artist and I need to do what I'm doing.
That's a good question. I actually don't believe that there is a moment like that, and I don't believe anybody who will say that. I don't think anybody has been born with a pencil in their asses, or I don't know, here. So I think it's really like, when I was a child, I wanted to first become a doctor, then I wanted to be a teacher, then I wanted to be a writer for a long time, then I wanted to be the minister of censorship.
Do we know which country?
Well, that was when I was around 14, and I was in Italy, and there were only really bad comedies in the cinemas, and very sexist. And I remember I felt, the young woman, very offended, and I thought if I could have that job, I would have forbidden a few things. And then actually, there is, when I was studying in Berlin, there was a professor of art history. I don't remember his name, but he said something I always remember. He said, you study art to see if you want to continue with that after the study. And so I also see it like that now. I think you study art, and then who knows, if you're going to continue making art, become an artist, what kind of an artist, will you make money with that, will you be able to have a studio, all these kind of things. But there was a moment after I finished the study, and I had maybe the first gallery shows and here in Berlin, where I really thought, well, now this is it. This is what I'm doing, and I cannot do anything else. And I remember it was a beautiful time, but I was very, very poor, really, like I remember checking all the jackets. I wear 10 D-mark, for the whole week. And I was, thanks God, working in a lot of bars and clubs, and so somehow I managed to stay alive. But so I did take a lot of risks in order to see if I would make it or not, as whatever it means, as an artist. Yeah.
Perhaps not many, or some people surely know, but perhaps not many people know that you were born in Venice, a city that, of course, rings many bells for so many people in the arts world because of the Biennale, the oldest Biennale, art Biennale, cinema, dance, all these different disciplines, in fact, in the world, a bit the model or kind of a go-to place at least every 2 years for people that are in contemporary art worldwide. But as a child, do you remember going, and did you feel something? I mean, you also went on to win the Golden Lion in 1999 as part of the Italian Pavilion for Best Pavilion, so quite early on in your career, in fact. But do you remember as a kid going to the Biennale and wondering, what the hell is this?
I do remember that I went to the biennials, and I have a work in mind, but I don't know if I'm dreaming it, if, one of these memories that you have when you're a child, and you don't know if it's really true or not, but I remember sitting on like kind of round chairs that were hanging from the ceiling, and you could listen to music, and I think it was a Japanese artist, but I have no idea. I was born in Venice, but I started school in Brescia, which is between Milan and Verona, so I was very young if I saw that during, So actually, my first memories of art, of having art around, are not really in Venice, besides, of course, the city and the architecture and, I grew up in Lido. I went to kindergarten there. It was a different time at that time. I mean, they taught us how to write, so I could write when I was 4 or something, writing postcards to grandma and grandpa and stuff like that. And I remember the fog of the city in the winter. I always say that I always get lost, which is true. I always get lost in every city, and I always say it's because of Venice, because it doesn't even make sense to try to find your way, But I mean, I grew up in Brescia, and which was a city where, as soon as I could, I left because I didn't like it, and it was actually the first time I realized what does it mean to, for example, for me it was a shock to move from Venice to Brescia because they were speaking a different dialect. And in the 70s, the dialect in Italy was very important, also because of Pasolini and all the books he wrote and the theater pieces that came out at the time. So I remember it was kind of a shock because I couldn't understand exactly what people were talking, and there were a lot of misunderstandings. And I grew up actually in a kind of community that was completely new, and a community that reminded very much of a gated community as we know them from California or something, or Brazil. I mean, it was not gated, there was no gate, but all the houses were the same, they were all new. I grew up on street 11th Street, number 9. That's where I grew up, so it was not very romantic, as people always imagine Italy. And my parents did buy art for decoration of the house or something, and I didn't know anybody else. I didn't know any other parents who were buying art. So I always thought it was very cool when they would come home with some big paintings of normally landscapes. Nothing special, but yeah.
Perhaps we can pick up on something you just said earlier about wanting to become a minister of censorship or something. And it's clear that, very early on also there were a lot of things that you felt weren't right, or that you felt you wanted to, maybe, rebel against or make a statement about. And if you look back on your studies, are there some artistic traditions or some things like perhaps sexism or others that you felt you wanted to react against when you pick up the studies, when you started studying actually?
Art.
Toward art, yes.
Well, when I started in art school, I started painting because really at that time I didn't know that art was something. I mean, I thought art is painting. I was so ignorant about art. I thought I wanted to express myself, which is something when I started teaching in 2003 in Vienna, I forbid my students to say, I want to express myself. Because who doesn't? We all want. But, so I wanted actually to start painting. I wanted to start in Venice, and then Vedova, I was a big fan of Vedova, and he also wanted to take me, but at the time I would have had to have done an examination, like a theory exam to get into the academy. And so in the between time I was here and applied here twice, because the first time they told me it was the worst portfolio they ever saw. I remember that very well. And and so I started painting, and I started painting in the class of Marwan, who is unfortunately now dead, who was a great painter, I think, and also a great man, and we got along very, very well. He came to Berlin as a political person at the time in the 70s, and he studied together with Baselitz, and I think also Baselitz took a lot from him, from his way of paintings. And then, you know, one day I had to move out from the class where I was working, and I packed everything, and I never took out the color anymore. And then I started drawing for an whole year, huge drawings. I think at that time I discovered minimal art, and I love drawings anyhow in general. I was very much into the drawings of Dana Judd, I must admit, at that time. And I really like the kind of, because it cannot draw, you know. I love it when artists cannot draw, but they draw. Like Valley Export, horrible drawings, but so beautifully, you know, at the same time. And Dana Judd, you know, when he was trying to draw furnitures or sculptures and so on, he had no idea about perspective. You know, everything was kind of like, and I really liked it, you know. So I started making all this stuff, and then I went to CalArts, and then there my mentor was Michael Escher, and that's where I started doing what I'm doing now, actually, essentially. And before going to CalArts, Isa Gensken also came to the UDK, and so we saw each other very often. And she was actually the first one who asked me, so what do you want to say to the audience? And I turned around like, you know, Robert De Niro, like, which audience? I mean, I'm here alone, nobody is around me. There is no show. There is, you know, Berlin back in the days, you know, there were 3 galleries where young people used to go, you know, and they were showing horrible things, besides one gallery that is still there. And so, yeah. But when I went to CalArts, of course, and also before, I was very much into, which is something that I discovered by myself, into minimal art, conceptual art, and that's something that immaterial art, and that's something that I really concentrated on when I was in CalArts, yeah.
Yeah, many of the artists you mentioned, Marwan or Isa Gensken, are also on view in the collection. We have also, of course, beautiful pieces by you in the collection. But maybe we can talk a bit about Berlin as well. You know, you just mentioned already that you studied at CalArts in LA, Los Angeles, but you also spent some time in London, but eventually actually came to Berlin and settled here. And what do you think drew you to the city initially? I mean, you mentioned a bit how it was different, but what drew you to the city, and what has it made for so many years a meaningful place for you to live and work as an artist?
Well, I always say that I came here by train because I wanted to visit some friends. So that was actually the reason. There was no... And I think people and artists pretty much of my generation who came to Berlin, let's say, I mean, I came really end of the 80s, but a lot of people came in the 90s, beginning of the 2000s. I think for a lot of us, it was like we didn't know where to go, as and where. I think at the time, a lot of Italians were going actually to London. That was more the logical way of going out of Italy to study in London. But I did I had also like a German teacher in high school who I loved. And I always say that, I have to say that again, that I had at the time, I was so young, I left when I was 19. And I wanted to read Nietzsche in German. By the time I finally could do that, I was not interested in Nietzsche anymore, of course. And then when I came to Berlin to visit this friend, I remember we were staying in Hermannplatz. He didn't have a bathroom. We went to have a shower. I don't know, I didn't even know that there were places like that where you put money in and have a shower, kind of. So, but yeah, and then it went like that. In the first 10 years I was in Berlin, I moved 20 times, which practically means I never had a place to stay, really. I was constantly outside, and I think that's what Berlin stuck me from the beginning, because it was ugly, it was dark, and I had an immense feeling of freedom. You know, I come from a family where, you know, very Italian, but, you know, the way you look is so important. And in Berlin, it was, you know, you could go out as you wanted, you know, who cared how you're dressed, and that was totally liberating for me. And also it was easy. It was easy to find apartments, cheap. It was easy to find jobs. It was easy to find friends. I didn't go to clubs in Berlin for the first, I don't know, I was very like a good girl, you know. I was going to the university every day and painting and so, but I started much later to go out at night. But it was a very easy city, I don't know. And everything was in decay. And that was something that I felt very, close to somehow, yeah.
You said Berlin was quite ugly. I think by many standards, it certainly is a city that has a lot of ruptures. And I think it is also marked by quite a brutal relationship with architecture in many ways. You know, you yourself came before the wall in 1986 for the first time, so seeing the wall, the division, but also all the ideologies, the destruction, this rapid creation, and these rapid ruptures in German history are very, very present, you know, no matter where you go. And this strong presence of architecture and history of architecture, how much has that played a role in your practice, do you think? You know, you said it's ugly. You obviously have a strong reaction to it. How does architecture, or how does Berlin's architecture perhaps in some way play a role in your work?
Yeah, I think at the time, coming from Italy, or yeah, you know, and then being in Berlin, that was so dark, and I mean, you could see the sign of the war were everywhere on every buildings practically. And then also going to LA, where everything was built out of drywalls. You know, nothing was built forever. And I come from a country where actually everything in the history is built forever. It takes forever to build it, and then it's forever there. And so the place also where you study, for example, I think it's a very important place. And it was not only my Kelly doing works on, you know, the educational program, but I remember also studying when I was still in Berlin, for example, how many square meter in Germany are allowed for students in dormitory, and how many square meter allowed in Los Angeles in dormitory, and so on. I mean, what are the codex of behavior that architecture force on you when you are, let's say, a student or not? So, and I think also a city like Berlin, that had the wall, it was, I mean, it's like, of course, as we know, but it was very visible and very tangible at the time. It's a place, I mean, Berlin was a place where you see that architecture is ideology, you know. I remember I had a studio many years in Kunstwerke, and I was looking into Linienstraße, and there were people living there, like, you know, from East Berlin, or living there since ever, and suddenly the whole street almost got bought by English people, by Icelandic people, and they all had to move out. And they were sometimes screaming toward us, toward Kunstwerke, because we were the bad people, right? The people who gentrified the corner. They had to move out. And sometimes I still think about them. Where did they go? To Marzahn, which was a horrible place to live at the time. You know, yeah, so architecture has definitely something, a very strong political message in itself, and that's something that you feel and you felt very strongly in Berlin during the time. Yeah.
You were also one of those artists that have shaped, or you continue to shape, the Berlin art scene. You've been around for a long time, many friendships, many discussions, many kind of works that travel from here around the world. And how would you say that since you first came, the art scene has evolved and changed? And has your personal relationship to the city changed in any way?
Well, yeah, we all know that if there were like 10 artists back in the days, now there are like 10,000. So if there were 3 galleries, like I said, now there are more than 400. So it has dramatically changed. I really have a studio since maybe 20 years, but before I didn't have a studio. I would rent if I needed space to do something, or I was actually working and living from my apartment. My apartment was actually my studio, so, and I could have it because everything was cheap and easy. Now, nothing is easy to find in Berlin. Apartments are very expensive. To find studios, it's even more difficult. And I think we will move definitely towards something like we have in LA, where you have friends that, I built myself a studio for 3 million. I built myself a studio for I don't know what. So this is not really happening. There are some here in Berlin as well like that, but it will definitely go in that direction. Also, back in the days, the museum were not working. I remember with some friends, we had this idea to kill some, to get rid of some directors of places, because...
I'm getting really worried now.
No, it was back in the days, but some people are there forever, and I don't know. Let's talk about like Berlusconi, Trump. Some people are there forever, and you have to do something. So it was just an idea, of course, but it was really as a young artist, or an artist showing all over the world, in Europe, in the US, everywhere, but you couldn't show in Berlin in a museum because they wouldn't allow it, because there was not the structure, there were not the people, and so on. And all the good curators, good young curators would not stay in Berlin because there was no job for them. So I also think this changed pretty much. There were no collectors. We have here the first brave collector who came to Berlin, and it was a big deal that that the Hoffmans came and opened this place directly in the center of the city, where I must say some other collectors who came later and so on wouldn't even go, until maybe 10 years ago. There were some collectors living on the south or east side of Berlin. They would never go to Kreuzberg because they think it's, I don't know, dirty or something. So it was really brave from the Hoffmans to do what they did at the time.
Perhaps we can talk a bit about your artistic practice as well and some of the recurring features. We can see some of the images, and I think it's here an example of using really tools that are used in architecture, but you often use other materials like glass or leather or quite strong materials, and you make them do things that they're not always meant to be doing. What is this fascination for these quite strong materials and the strong kind of alteration of their intended purpose? Where do you think that's coming from?
Well, I have to say, like I said at the beginning, I never studied sculpture, right? I studied painting, and then I started making installations, and I do consider myself mostly an installation artist and a sculpture, and working in CalArts with Michael Escher gave me really I've always been interested in how spaces are making us feel, right? I was not only researching about the dormitory in Europe and the US, but I read a lot of books of like biographies, mostly of feminist writers who had to live in psychiatric hospitals, for example. I was reading a lot at the time in the 80s. It was a kind of literature that was everywhere, memories and biographies of people who, mostly women, I was reading, who were spending years in prison in South America because of dictatorship and so on. And so I was always very interested in the idea of what happens when you are when you have to live in a place that is institutionalized and where the rules are not the rules that you do, Frank Gehry died yesterday, the great architect, and I remember that, the house he built for himself in Los Angeles, he was quite crazy, and it was the beginning of this kind of postmodernist architecture. It was a good example for it, but he built the kitchen exactly there where where everybody built a kitchen. The kitchen is in a house. It's normally built in the back side of the house, so that the traditional role of woman of the housewife was to cook and to look out of the window and to see the children play. And he repeat that, for example. So when I was, also when I was in CalArts, I was there for a year, and you know, you don't start making I don't know what, and then you have no money to bring it back when you're a student. So I did two important works for me, and that were like installations that dealt with the architecture of CalArts, and I did a lot of calls, and I received all the materials as sponsored. At the time, you could get materials sponsored from companies, you know, especially construction materials. So that's what I could do somehow, work with architecture, with construction materials. I remember my parents are totally getting crazy. They didn't know what to answer when people would ask, what does Monica do? Is she still painting? They would say, no, she's in construction. So, and I read many books. You know, for example, a book that was very important to me was Discrimination by Design, which is a book I read in the middle of the 90s by Leslie Kane Wiseman, who was describing how every city is built by man for man, for example. Space and Sexuality was also a very important book for me, also in the 90s by Beatrice Colomina. And but also because maybe my approach to art when I finished, when I quit painting was mostly, as I said, related to minimal and conceptual art, and those artists were also working with new materials, right? I mean, Frank Stella, for example, also did, who was, by the way, often seen at Erika's place. He was also a sculptor who did everything that he could do with a material that couldn't do that, you know, and I think that's what every artist also tried to do. I mean, I always try to do something, everybody, you can't, but then you can, somehow. So I was interested in working with something that is very simple, geometrical. Also some works of mine, the recent works of mine that are mostly like working with, worked with color mirrors, integrate then that are industrial material, that are really by, from companies that are working for industry, for building industry, but then I integrate them with self-made objects out of glass or out of leather. So there is always, for me, it's very important to bring two kind of worlds together. The one of the small workshops, maybe, and there are a lot also in Berlin, small workshops that are really working hard to support artists and to help artists to do things. And on the other side, use what the industry is producing, So the combination of them is very interesting for me and important.
You were also talking a little bit about space. You said you work in construction, but perhaps one thing that is also striking when you see some of your larger installations, but even the smaller ones, is that they have a very strong presence in a physical space. And how much do you think about these spaces when you create works, or the spatial presence of your work? Is that important? Can the works exist anywhere, or is there a really, in your mind, as you conceive something, already an anticipation of how they sit in a space and how they make people feel when they encounter them?
Yeah, I think with a show, you don't really, I think I'm a horrible storyteller, and I didn't become a writer. But when you have a show, like a big show, like in a museum show, a solo show, or something like that, of course, you are dealing with a certain narrativity, right? I remember when I did the show at the Vienna Secession in 2003, for example, with Sam Durant, we were thinking, okay, do we use this first white cube of Europe as a stage, or do we use it as a cage, So there is always this idea, which is very important for me also, how do I which is nothing new. I mean, Bruce Nauman did it, and I don't know, many other people before me, but I mean, how do you navigate people into a space, into the exhibition space, and what do you want them to see first and second and so on? Of course, you cannot force people to walk certain ways, but you can suggest certain paths of viewing places. So, and you know, some people say, oh, but how can you be, for example, claustrophobic now that we have social media, and if you have your phone, you can be all over the world, and it doesn't matter if you're really there. But it's not true, you know. You can be claustrophobic. I am claustrophobic. I don't like small places. I don't like old places. I like white cubes. I like museums. I like to move in them. I like to smell the air. I like to feel the air if I walk fast or not. So I think the way we perceive each other and the way we perceive spaces is also important. And art and sculpture and installation, it's only about that, practically, right?
Yeah, true. Another thing that is really recurring, and you touched upon it a few times, are also power dynamics, perhaps between genders, between artist and institution, and maybe we can talk a little bit about gendered power dynamics, which you also mentioned early on when you wanted to become the Minister of Censorship. Unmistakably, this is a feature in your work, and how do you navigate in your practice that it becomes maybe a bit subversive in a critique without maybe becoming like, I don't know, I don't want to use the word obvious, but something that is really right there. Like, how do you navigate that it's art and not just a protest, or is it both, or how do you navigate this?
This is an interesting question because, I mean, it's also the question that in the last 10 years has been so important to a lot of artists and also museums. I mean, it's, you know, what's the difference, if there is a difference between being an activist artist and a political artist maybe, or something like that. So, and I find it very difficult also to talk about works. Because the process of realizing a work or an installation, it's so complex, you know. It's a combination of being with people, of different dialogues with really like director of museums, curators, workers, your colleague, you know, the studio, people working in the studio, your friends. But on the other side, it's also something that you have to decide yourself. There is a moment of total, complete, solitary thinking, right? And this balance, it's often not so easy to keep, let's say. Coming back to a question, I mean, I think I maybe coming from Italy, I don't know, but I also left Italy because and that's also something I loved when I came to Berlin. In Italy, you know, as a young girl, you know, guys were constantly thinking that they could, you know, throw words on you as they liked. So this didn't happen here. If you would go out, guys didn't try to flirt with you. Great. If you would wait at the bus station in the subway, nobody would come and scream at you some stuff. I mean, I remember when I was young, I answered twice, and once I got a slap in my face. So there was a kind of violence that was on the street somehow, and I'm not even talking of big cities or whatever, it was just in the air. So when I for example, when I did Wall Fucking, which is actually the installation that maybe put certain questions I had about gender on the map, let's say. That was, for example, because of a lecture I heard by the professor, my very good friend, which I don't think is here, Susanne von Falkenhausen, who was giving a talk and wrote a book actually about round architecture, but also because I read the book by Thomas Bernhard, Korrektur, which is an amazing, funny book, I mean, in which this guy is trying to unsuccessfully, but he's trying to build a perfect architecture for his sister, which has to have a cone form, you know. I mean, anyhow, the idea of doing something round for a woman, while he was planning and drawing and getting crazy in a little square room, a kind of studiolo, and many men don't get away from this studiolo, you know. The studiolo exists from the beginning until now for men. You know, we have otherwise The Room of Your Own by Virginia Woolf. But so wall fucking was for me really like a kind of statement, personal statement. I mean, maybe for kind of it was a liberating moment. I was also reading at the time. I think it's a very interesting book, even now. Hardcore by what's his name? William. Maybe Leonie William, that was the first book. I mean, she was the first academic professor who started researching on the visuals of pornography and meaning pleasure. Mm-hmm. So how do you translate pleasure into a cinematic, let's say, picture? Mm-hmm. You know, what kind of photographs, what kind of strategies are you using? And she was, for example, the chapter that interested me most was about the money shot, and I also did works about it, and one of them it also belongs here, which I call the blind shot, but maybe so this is a little bit too long to explain. But I was never, to go back to your question, I'm not interested, I think, I'm not interested to protest as an act of protest. I mean, I do protest and I go out on the street if as a citizen, you know, if I want to, but my art has, is so much more complex and complicated than go out and hold. I mean, that's very important, but it's something else.
Well, you are also very outspoken and clearly say a lot of things very clearly, which I think is wonderful, and you use text a lot in your work as a non-tangible medium, unlike leather or other materials. Text is very strong, and in fact you're wearing, again, a t-shirt that says, I was trying to read it before, "Fuck it about" or something like this. Whatever you want to read into it. What is the role of text in your work, and why do you keep choosing to use text and letters in your work?
I mean, the fact that I wanted to become a writer, of course, it's important, even if I didn't become one. But I'm an avid reader, and I believe in the power of words, as I also believe in the power and consequently misunderstanding of words. We think that we get along because we talk to each other, but it's not true, actually. We very often don't get along because of that, or we do misunderstand each other. And so when I started making some big sculpture, for example, the big Satisfy Me or the big Desire, these were maybe the first sculptures I did that were also using a kind of mirror and mirror surface, although it was actually a steel, it was no mirror, but it was a kind of confrontation with the public and with the surrounding that was important to me. And I must say that after a while, I also stopped working with language because I thought it was not the time anymore for big slogans, let's say. I did for maybe 10 years, didn't do really much about language, and I started again maybe 5 years ago. I do read a lot of poetry, and I very often have a lot of books around me, and it takes always a lot of time until I put all the quotations that are interesting to me in that moment together, and then I work on them, I re-edit them. I love to do editing any way, and that's then how some of the new works are coming. But I think I also belong to a generation of women like, Barbara Kruger, Jenny Holzer. There is also, of course, as we know, girls learn to speak and to write much faster than boys. I mean, there is something, a tradition on one side where I think I feel very strongly connected to, and also I feel I have somehow, it's my job to continue it. And on the other side, it's something that is really of big interest to me. Also the question of translation, for example, because I only speak 3 languages, which is not so much, but still 3 languages, and I think in all the 3 languages. And if I say desire, or if I say satisfy me, what do you understand about that? Definitely something different than I do, because I come with my own cultural background,
and you read it in a different way. And I really like this kind of confrontation then. Yeah.
You also have a strong history with Hamburger Bahnhof in particular. Amongst many other things, you were awarded the Preis der Nationalgalerie in 2005. When was the first time you came to Hamburger Bahnhof, or do you have some memories even from the early years, or something that struck you about it?
Yeah, I was thinking about it. When was Hamburger Bahnhof? When did it open?
96. It'll be 30 years next year.
Okay, 96. Then did it open with the Recallen already?
No, the Recallen came later, 10 years later.
Yeah. So to the opening of the Recallen, I didn't come out of political reason. I definitely, I mean, like I said, I was in a group show here, I don't even remember the name of it, upstairs in 2005 when we did the Prize of the National Gallery. I was here quite often, but it used to be a place, an unpleasant place. So it was not a place where you felt welcome, and that's a huge difference to now. It was very, I don't know, I saw very beautiful shows here, but it was cold, and it was like, you know, people were unfriendly. People like working here were unfriendly. Yes, some people remember. It was a little bit like going into military camp or something. You know, like. So, yeah, that's changed, of course, a lot. But I think also when we did the Preis der Nationalgalerie in 2005, I think we changed so much, the four of us. We really changed the system because at the time, just very briefly, but you had to come and show a new work, if I remember right. You had to show new work, and you didn't get any money for it. The winner will get, of course, the money then. And I thought, why should I do a new work? And who's going to pay for it? I mean, it was, I didn't have a gallery also at the time in Berlin. And so altogether we decided that, okay, so the friend of the National Gallery will find some money some budget to produce some new works, either want to have some new works. So that was actually the first time that it happened. And I remember I wanted to do a work that at the end I didn't do it because there were, I remember very well, 5,000 were missing. And I didn't want to put them by myself. And I said, no, I don't do this. And everybody was so upset with me. It was a month before. But a month before the opening or something, but I managed to do the work that I want, another work. And the work that I originally wanted to do, I still hope to do one day, because it's still there. It's even easier now to do, because, yeah. So.
I'm glad you came back. And you also, maybe fast forward almost 20 years later, you had your big solo exhibition in our sister museum on Kulturforum, the Neue Nationalgalerie. This was now 3 years ago. How do you see museums in general for your practice and your work as a stage, as an interlocutor, as your work, and what do you think is the role of these institutions, and what will it be if you now think in 30 years from now, perhaps?
Yeah, the institutions are, of course, as we know, in a huge crisis, right? So I think, first of all, I think all the museums should be free. It will change a lot, and I mean, this pressure that you all have to, and that we consequently as artists have to have a lot of audience, the numbers. It's something that would be so easy if you would just make it free. And it wouldn't cost, I think in Stockholm they did a test, or maybe in different cities also. It's not so much more expensive than having some people to sit there and, print the tickets and everything. I understand myself as I want to to work with the curators, with the people in the museum as a collaborator, right? I mean, I don't want to be invited and be a guest. I want to, if you give me this space, it's my space. Then we can talk about what to do with this space. But I like to be able to have a conversation that is on the same level, let's say. And because also, I mean, I'm not 20 anymore, and I know very good what I can do, what I cannot do, and what the institution needs in that moment, or in general. So starting from there, of course, the conversation is different than if I would have been young. And then, of course, the big problem of museums is that they have artworks. I mean, that's the reason why there are museums, but it's also the big problem, because it costs a lot. And I mean, I did a work in Belvedere 21, for example, that was dealing a little bit with the idea of a museum as a place of death, right? Where you have only works that are there and nobody see them, stuff like that. So, I mean, you need a lot of money, and it's absolutely important for I mean, we have cuts now from the state of Germany and from Berlin, which are so horrible, and they always cut first into the cultural places, which is so wrong, you know, because. And we saw it also during the pandemic, that the people loved to go to museum. People love to go to see old masters. They love to go and see whatever contemporary art. It's a place where people can be absolutely free, alone, stay there for hours, concentrate on something that they don't know yet. It's so important. How they will develop, I have no idea. They must definitely be a space of conversations, and I mean, there is also now a lot is done for education in museums, which is also something that bothers me sometimes, because a lot of money goes into the education and not into the budget for artists. Or, for example, there is always a budget for the architectural display of shows, where I'm also always say, no, I need it because I do the architecture of my show. But yeah, so they have to be open and be integral part of the city. I mean, like in London, you see it, you know, people go just during their breaks to sit in the portrait gallery and see some old paintings. I mean, that's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, we agree. I think it should be a place of social encounters, and I think we can see on a Saturday afternoon how many people come here, even though the Christmas markets are all open, and so many people come to the museums. And I think after the pandemic, we also saw how quickly people came back, you know, and I really feel this is so crucial to have conversations, dialogues, and simply a place where you live moments of solidarity and collectivity despite all possible differences. Maybe a last question before we also open up to the public is that, you know, you said somewhere that you never, you teach actually sculpture, but you never studied it, in fact. And you teach at the UDK for many, many years. And I really am curious to see, what are you telling your students about how to maybe persist, take risks in complicated times, less resources, or what do you tell younger artists as they're starting out in their careers?
Well, there are some students of mine here. I don't know if they should answer.
I should ask them, maybe.
No, maybe not.
But, you know, they can ask questions afterwards. So.
No, I have a lot of respect, I must say, for people who want to study art, for the same reason that I said before, because there is no guarantee that these years you spend in the art academy, art institution, art school will bring you anything real, you know? I mean, real in the sense of you're really risking a lot. And so I'm very happy that so many students are taking this risk. On the other side, I also think, and I tell them, you must be built as an artist to be an artist, because it's a difficult job You need to be able to do many, many things at once, and things that no academy, no art school can prepare you to, you know. Like I said before, be able to deal with a lot of social things, but also to be able to be alone. You need to travel, you need to be very flexible, you need to be physically strong, I think, also to, you know, maintain a certain rhythm. So, and then you need to have something to say. You need to find what you have to say. That is so important, that you really want other people to listen to. So that's what I...
So now we would also like to open to the public, including the students. I'm very happy that you came today. And we would be very happy if someone now takes the risk to ask a question. And Lorenz has a microphone over here. Thank you.
Hi, Monica, and yeah, thank you so much for having you here, both of you, and making this possible. Maybe two questions. One is, if you knew that your path will evolve this way, would you have started it? And the other question, if you imagine you're maybe 80 years old and you look back on your life, is there anything that you wish you specifically, how people remember you, or are there specific works that you still would love to do that you dream of and you haven't built yet?
When I'm 80.
Something like that.
Right.
Just old at the end of your life. Or over 100, I don't know.
I don't think people will remember me. I mean, I live so much in now. I mean, now is now. I mean, I don't think about what people will say or think about me. I hope the museums will be still there and some of my works will still be shown. I hope I contributed somehow to make something in art history as much as I could. I hope that will remain. I hope some people will, the same way I feel a responsibility toward, let's say, some other female artists before me. I hope that some younger artists will feel the same with me. But I don't really know, I mean, yeah. You know, for example, I have a huge library. I have so many books. And this year I turned 60, and for the first time I started thinking, what do I do with all these books, you know? I was always so content and happy to have all these special books, and some were in a special edition and this and that. And now I'm just thinking, what do I do with that when I'm done? Okay. But yeah, so, and when I was young, I don't know, when I was young, you know, when you're young, you just do it, just do things.
And maybe one additional, if you could advise other artists, or maybe especially moments when you didn't know how to continue, or what was your feeling or the way that you kept your vision, or that you didn't give up, like just moments. I'm interested. How was there a certain thought or
yeah. I mean, if I would have to tell it to you, I would say, fuck, it stays. You know, the moment where you think, what I'm gonna do now? How is it going ahead? What do I do? It stays with you forever. So it stays with you on an 80. You know, it's nothing comes in art naturally. You don't cheat art. You know, so it's always very. It stays. It's part of being an artist. That's because it's so difficult to be an artist, also.
Do we have another question? Yeah, in the front.
Thanks, Monica. Holm Friebe, Works on Skin. You've talked a lot about cities and a certain spirit there. Do you sense that there's a notion or a vibe in Berlin that is a little more solidary and less competitive than other art cities? Or is that just an idea about Berlin that stems from the 90s, and above a certain level, everybody's fighting for themselves?
That's actually, to be sincere, the first moment I realized I had the feeling or understood and felt really what solidarity is between artists was in California. It was not here. I mean, and if you have been around the world, you know that, you know, in this part of the world, this way of working, I do this, is still there. It's not like this, you know. So Berlin is rough still. There is, you know, you have your friends and you have your enemies, so.
Perhaps I can add for the institutions, I do feel, not coming from Berlin and coming here, that at least at the moment there are many institutions that are really looking to collaborate, and we have very good friendly exchanges on informal and formal levels with many, many institutions. So I do think at the moment I feel there is something that is about coming together, I can say. But do we have other questions from the audience?
Do you consider yourself happy when you create? Or how is the feeling when you create?
Oh, there is, I only know a little poetry by memory, but it's in Italian, and it says, ma sei felice? Ah, queste cose così bianche e lisce. Felice non si dice, è una parola che malincolisce. That's my answer.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much, Monica. This was absolutely wonderful.